All right, give me 1 second, everybody. Just gonna go ahead and set up for today. All right, so good afternoon, everyone. I'm just gonna give me 1 second. I'm just going to double check we're working here, and just gonna take care of a couple things. All right, now, good afternoon and welcome to our course. I know there were webinars, I should say. We had some issues previously, so I wanted to apologize for that. There were some technical glitches, and unfortunately some people made our webinar a little difficult. And of course, I know there's some people that could not attend due to time constraints. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and record this. There was not going to be any time for questions anyway, but my hope is that by the conclusion of this webinar, you'll have most, if not all, of your questions answered. But of course, if you haven't, we're going to have a link at the end of the program that will allow you to ask whatever questions you have. All right. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and get started. Of course, our webinar is about the CARES Act. We will be discussing the disaster loan and the emergency grant that comes with it, as you'll see on the second point. We're going to also talk about the loan forgiveness that comes with the payment protection program, as well as business payment of student loans, the redemption credit, defer of payroll taxes, and of course, net operating losses. Now, there have been some changes since this PowerPoint was done. They occurred late last night. Unfortunately, due to my multiple meetings, I just did not have the time to update the PowerPoint. So what I'm going to do is, as I go over items, I'm going to actually adjust that accordingly. Now, with respect to the loan forgiveness, this is connected to the Paycheck Payment Protection Program, or what we call the PPP. Now, the loan itself is done through the 7A program, which means you'll have to go to an SBA approved lender. So you should check with your bank right now to see if they're an SBA approved lender, and if they're not, you'll want to check with other banks. As of right now, there's only about one bank that's currently accepting applications, or processing them, better said. Many of them are starting to accept it, but they're not processing because they're not set up. Okay, so you still have some time, but don't wait, all right? Because it is on a first come, first served basis. Now, for the purposes of the PPP, it used to be for an S7A, you needed to be at least 2 years in business. For the PPP, that's not the case. So long as you were in business by February 15th, you can qualify for this program. Okay, that means startups and businesses less than 2 years. All right. However, there is a requirement. The loan is based on payroll, and the maximum you can receive is 2.5 times your monthly payroll costs, not to exceed $10 million. Okay, and again, it's on a first come, first served basis. Now, the loan forgiveness portion is up to 8 weeks of covered expenses, but the loan itself can exceed 8 weeks. So you could have a loan for 12 weeks, 16 weeks. The equivalent is roughly 4 months or more if you need it. Okay, and of course, if you get approved for it, because these are all things that you could get, not necessarily going to get approved, not saying you're going to get approved for a specific amount. Now we get into some of the changes that have taken place since this PowerPoint presentation was done. And as you can tell, the law came out last week, and we've had all these changes since then. So payroll costs. At the beginning, 1099s were considered part of the business that issued the 1099s for calculating payroll costs. No longer. Anyone who received a 1099, they're supposed to apply themselves for the 1099. Okay, for their own PPP, should they want to. They can go to their bank and they can get a paycheck protection program for their own 1099. Any individual business cannot. Any individual business can only include W-2 wages, and of course anything that goes along with it, paid leave, vacation time. All of those benefits count towards payroll costs, including taxes. Okay, what else is included in covered expenses? You have payment of interest on business mortgages, rent obligations, and utility payments. And for those three options, notice it must have started before February 15th. All right, now, Another side note on this loan, as well as even the disaster loan, this is only available for those that have been impacted by the coronavirus. If you were already suffering prior to the coronavirus event, this is not going to be available to you. Okay, it is only for those who were impacted by the coronavirus. All right, now, in addition to that, there was another change. Notice that says here it's for qualified employees who earn less than $100,000. If you had employees previously under the original law, if you had employees that were made over 100,000, those employees were disqualified. Now they are allowing them, but only up to 100. So when you're doing your application package, make sure to cap them at 100. Okay, because the last thing you want is to get declined because you entered more money than you were allowed to. Okay, and it seems that utility payments may be including cell phones if the company paid for them. All right, so that's very important. Now, and I apologize if you see me looking, these are my cheat sheet from the changes that took place. So I'm just making sure that I've covered all of them. Now, for the amounts of the loan that exceed the 8-week forgiveness period, it used to be you have to pay that back over 10 years at a rate under 5. Now they are saying you have to pay it back in 2 years at a 1% rate. It's still a good rate. It's still, you know, a decent time frame, but you do have 1% interest and you have to pay it back. Any misuse of these funds is a criminal infraction. What's a misuse of these funds? Using the funds for anything other than payroll, as we've revised, interest on business mortgages, rent obligations, and utility payments. If you use it for anything other than those things, that is a misuse of funds. Now, of course, if you use something accidentally, then we get into different analysis. Also, what came down recently, the percentage of the forgiveness amount for non-payroll costs cannot exceed 25%. Meaning, if you seek a forgiveness and the total balance is $100,000, the cap is 25%. Meaning $25,000 in that scenario. It means your non-payroll costs, your interest, your rent, your utilities cannot exceed $25,000 in that example. Okay? Loan forgiveness. So the loan forgiveness. So if you apply for the loan forgiveness, which you do not apply for when you apply for the loan, one thing that people think is that they're applying for a forgiveness or a free money. You are applying for a loan. At June 30th, after June 30th, when you can start applying for loan forgiveness. You must apply for the loan forgiveness. It is a separate application process from the loan itself. When you apply, and presuming you get it approved, it will be canceled. There will not be a cancellation of debt. It will not report on your credit. In any case, it'll show on your credit as current because there's still a loan, and only what's going to happen is the SBA is going to guarantee it, and they're going to take over the payments of it. Okay, that portion, that forgiven portion. All right. Now, the following list below outlines some of the things that are needed for the forgiveness application. I don't want to get into too much details because there's been so much changes to this law that there's likely going to be more changes regarding the application process for the forgiveness. These are some of the things that they're going to look for. Okay, so keep that in mind when you're calculating this. Now, how do you determine your forgiveness? They're going to base your average employees and salary and pay for the 8-week period from the origination of the loan. So if let's say you get the loan today and you get it approved today, April 3rd, they're going to compare it 8 weeks after April 3rd of 2020 to April 3rd, 8 weeks after to 2019. Now, if you weren't in business that time period, they're going to take the first 8 weeks of this year in order to calculate that. Now you say, oh, well, what if I don't have payroll? Well, then you may not be able to qualify for the PPP program because, again, it's for paycheck protection. However, you may apply for the disaster loan. Okay, the disaster loan is not basing it on payroll. It is basing it on what you can use it for, which are fixed expenses. Okay, so that is available to you. So, for example, insurance is a fixed expense, not allowed under PPP, but you're allowed to pay it under the disaster loan. And a question was asked, can I apply for both? Yes, you can apply for both, but you can't double dip. You can't go for the same amount of money for both of the same things. If you're going for rent, interest, utility payments, and paychecks, and let's say you're going for insurance in your disaster loan, you can certainly do that. You will not get reduced. But remember that if you're applying for the same amounts, one will be reduced for the other loan. Okay. And a side note, depending on what state you're in, some states are running their own programs. Some are loans, some are grants. So you want to look at your states as well. They're usually separate from the federal government. These are federal government programs. All right. Now, the disaster loan, you have to have been in business starting January 31st, not February 15th, as in the case of the PPP. Addition to that, the disaster loan Anything less than $25,000 does not require collateral. Anything above that does. You're allowed to get up to $2 million from the disaster loan. It is up to 30 years you can pay it, and it's at a 3.75% for for-profit companies, 2.75 for nonprofits. Notice I mentioned nonprofits can get it. Now, there are certain exceptions. Religious organizations cannot. Real estate developers cannot apply for disaster loan. So keep that in mind. This is designed to pay fixed expenses of the business. Okay. The purpose of these loans is to keep the business functioning, not to give you money to run the business in terms of, oh, to buy inventory and buy, products so you can resell it. That's not what the purpose of either of these loans are. It's just to keep the lights on. But the equivalent will be a medically induced coma while the situation resolves itself. Now, for the purposes of the grant, okay, we've already mentioned the applicable organizations that can qualify. Okay. Another thing, the disaster loan, unlike the 7A loan, is done directly with the SBA. You go to the SBA, they will issue the loan. All right. Same thing with the emergency grant, which supposedly, last check, they're issued as grants in 3 days after the application is processed. Okay. And the amount is up to 10, not 10, up to 10,000. So it could be less. Keep that in mind. Okay. Yes, the grant, you would not have to pay it back. Okay. The loan you would. Now, of course, it must be for an allowable purpose. You can only use the grant for certain things. You must outline what you're going to use it for, whether it's paid sick leave, payroll, increased costs, mortgage payments, rent obligations, insurance, things of that sort. For the grant itself, these are the items. Okay, so keep that in mind. Now, two important issues. You cannot use it to repay any amounts that were advanced under the subsection. If you were to not, you don't need it. If you get denied the loan, you could still technically get the grant. Okay, so that's what it's basically saying there. So even if you get denied a loan, you may still get the advance, and that's perfectly fine. If the applicant, if you receive the loan, okay, and subsequently you also apply for a PPP and you get a loan forgiveness, the loan forgiveness will reduce your emergency grant. So if you apply for both and you get, let's say, $8,000 or let's say $4,000 from the loan forgiveness, and you get an emergency grant for $6,000, well, you're only going to get $2,000 from that emergency grant because they're going to factor in the payment from that. Okay. Now, next topic, student loans. Prior to this year, student loans were not a deductible expense to businesses. For this year, they were allowing a business to pay for its employees' student loans. Now, if you are a owner of a business and you're on payroll, you're saying, hey, you know what? This is great. This is awesome. I can deduct my student loans. Not so fast. It is capped for 5% owners. So if you are at least a 5% owner, the most of the total amount deductible expense of student loans can be 5% of the total paid. Now, if you are the owner and you're the only one with student loans, you're out of luck. You won't be able to get any of your student loans paid. Now, the employment payroll tax redemption credit. There have been some slight changes. If there are any changes to what's on the spreadsheet, or the slides, I will post that. But for now, it is a credit against applicable employment taxes up to 50% of qualified wages. And in the next line, what's qualified wages? An amount not to exceed $10,000. All right. The credit is limited to Social Security. It is a refundable credit. So if you exceed your tax amount, you can get the difference in a refund. All right. Very important. Now, you must have had a significant decline in revenues. So it must have declined by 50% beginning in the first quarter of this year compared to the first quarter of last year, or in the case of the end, and of course by the end, a 20% reduction, significantly, to show that there was a significant loss. All right, from the year to year. Now you say to yourself, well, what if I wasn't in business last year, or what if there was different circumstances last year? You can send me in the link at the end. You can contact me, and we can talk about what your scenario is and see how that's going to impact you. Okay. Again, this is for payroll taxes, 941s. Okay, that's what we're referring to here. Now, very important points to know. You cannot pay an employee more than what they receive. So you have to base it on what they actually earned in the previous 30-day period. If you apply for the 7A loan forgiveness program, you are automatically ineligible to apply for this credit. All right. And right now, as you know, it's April. We're filing our first quarter. If you already anticipate you're going to take advantage of this credit, you're not going to get the loan forgiveness. You're going to start calculating the credit. and you start running the numbers and you say to yourself, well, I run the numbers, and based on the numbers that I'm calculating with the credit, my numbers will be reduced by X amount. You can go ahead and reduce that X amount, factoring in the credit. Okay. Now, this year as well, another advantage that they're going to be providing is they're going to allow you to defer your payroll taxes. Okay, what does that mean? That means that if you are a quarterly filer of payroll taxes, a monthly depositor, a biweekly depositor, they are allowing, they being the IRS, allowing you to delay payments penalty free so long as all the payments are made by December 31st at the end of this year. Okay. Now, that doesn't absolve you of interest, so there may still be interest that's charged. Okay, and that's a separate matter on an individual basis you can discuss with the IRS. There may be changes to this as well, where they waive interest, but as of right now, you may have to pay interest. But this is an opportunity to pay those taxes by the end of the year. Now, this is a situation where if you have the cash flow that you can pay taxes, pay them on time. Don't take advantage of something if you don't need it. This is really for individuals and businesses that don't have the money. They don't have the cash flow to make the payments. Take advantage. If you have the ability to pay the taxes timely. Don't run into a problem where you have all this amount of money due at the end of the year. Okay. Finally, carryback period. Most small businesses, virtually all small businesses, probably won't really appreciate this benefit. Just to give you a quick rundown of what this is. Prior to 2017, if you had a loss, you could carry it back into two prior years to take advantage of the loss and offset any profits and get a refund on taxes paid. In 2017, they got rid of this carry back, and you had to go carry forward. They brought it back just for this year. Now, for a lot of flow-through entities, if you're an 1120S, 1065, a sole proprietor, Schedule C, this is really not going to affect you. So I wouldn't even worry too much about this, because this is really for business entities that have a separate fund that pay their own taxes on those separate filings. Most small businesses, S corps, LLCs, they don't pay taxes. They have a flow through. They just file tax, but they don't pay anything. So, and this is referring to income tax, not payroll tax. All right. Now, if you had any questions at all after our presentation that you would like to ask me, here is the link where you can submit your questions. It'll ask you for your name, your contact information, as well as the questions itself, and we'll be more than happy to answer any questions that you have. Again, for those who couldn't make it, no worries. We'll get to your questions. For those who were able to attend and had the technical issues, apologize for that. We'll hopefully, for the next webinar, we'll try and avoid those issues in the future. Thank you for your time. I look forward to seeing your questions, and if you have anything else to add, I am more than happy to answer them. Until next time, good luck. And if there's any changes, we'll most likely have another webinar regarding that. All right. Have a great day, everybody.